you know who you're here to see. Of course, we're joined by Yanis Varoufakis, former finance minister of Greece, author and irrepressible firebrand, I would say. You can scoff all you like. I actually met Yanis back in 2015, and he won't remember this because...
I do remember it.
You don't remember it at all.
It was in Brighton.
It was not in Brighton, it was in London. And the reason why he won't remember this is because he was doing something much more important at the time. He was in London, I believe, to talk to George Osborne.
Oh, yes.
There's a name that we haven't heard for a while.
Fun, fun, fun. 11 Downing Street.
And I think you'd just done an interview with Channel 4, and you'd come into a pub on Gray's Inn Road where a young literature student served you a pint of Peroni on the house to say thank you for everything you'd done taking on the Troika. He remembers nothing of this. But we're not here to talk about pints of Peroni. We're here to talk about your new book, Technofeudalism. So come on, give us the big sell. What is Technofeudalism?
It's a book I wrote to annoy my comrades on the Marxist left.
It worked.
It worked. Now, it's a joke, but it's not far-fetched. Look, some time ago I started feeling apprehensive about the previous book which I wrote, which was talking to my daughter, a brief history of capitalism. And it felt as if I was writing a book that was obsolete before it was published, because I was getting this feeling, which may be wrong, you will decide that, once you read the book, that it was a bit like writing a book in 1989 about Soviet economic planning. It was already on the way out. So I got this sensation that, my God, here it is. I'm putting everything I have, all my energy, in explaining to my daughter capitalism, when capitalism is already giving up its place as the dominant socioeconomic mode of production to a different socioeconomic mode of production, which is much, much worse and much more scary. And it's in the process of evolving out of capitalism. In the same way that we had a great transformation around 250 years ago from feudalism to capitalism. And what was that transformation? Power shifted from the owners of land to the owners of machines, of capital goods, of produced means of production, like steam engines, electricity, cables, and all that. With that transformation that ushered in capitalism and replaced feudalism, you had the shift from land and ground rent as the source of wealth accumulation. Once upon a time, the great buildings, the great cathedrals were the result of accumulating ground rent to the feudal lords who owned the land. And immediately, during this and after this great transformation, if you owned the machines, you accumulated not rent, but profit. And that was the source of all power under capitalism. So around 5, 6 years ago, I started feeling that now we have a new great transformation. Power is shifting, in the way it shifted from the owners of land to the owners of machines, it is shifting to the owners of a new kind of machine, a new kind of capital, a mutation of capital. My hypothesis, and this is what I am proposing in this book, is that capital was so successful, it steamrolled over labor, over civil society, over the movements. It defeated us. And it became so dominant that it mutated, like a lethal virus mutates into a more toxic variant. We have a new form of capital, a mutant capital, which I call cloud capital. It's the capital that lives in your phone, on your laptop, on the cloud, the proverbial cloud, which is of course on Earth, and in the oceans, the form of optic fiber cables and all that. But the reason why I'm thinking of this as a very different form of capital is because every form of capital we've had since the beginning of time, since the beginnings of humanity. We always had capital goods, machines, instruments before capitalism. A fishing rod is something you produce, not because you want it on its own, but because you want the fish that you will catch with it. So it's a produced means of production. A tractor. You produce the tractor not in order to drive around London, unless, of course, you're completely mad, but in order to produce agricultural commodities, a produced means of production. Well, the capital inside our phones or on the proverbial cloud is not a produced means of production, it's a produced means of behavioral modification. Its purpose is to modify our behavior. And anyone, and this is my hypothesis, this is how I end my long-winded answer to your kick-starting question, anyone who owns this cloud capital, like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or Zuckerberg, but not only these well-known owners of cloud capital, cloudalists I call them in the book, but also people you've never heard of in Indonesia, in Malaysia, where cloud capital is taking over as we speak. These owners of cloud capital have now the most power to extract value that other people have created in the way that the owners of the steam engines and the locomotives and the electricity power stations used to. Now it is the owners of this cloud capital, because cloud capital allows you to create digital fiefdoms, like think of Amazon.com. And what is this digital fiefdom? It's made of cloud capital, so it's digital land in a sense, and once you own it, you capture in it users, consumers, and capitalists who produce the stuff you buy on Amazon.com, and you charge them up to 40% of the asking price. That's a form of ground rent, which I call cloud rent. So over the period of 3 or 4 years that led to the writing of this book, I felt that this is a new mode of production. Something quite distinct from capitalism. It is capitalism, if you want to call it that, in the sense that it's based on capital, but it's a mutation of capital which has killed off capitalism in the sense that no longer are markets and profits the pylons of the system, as capitalism was. Markets and profits. Now, what's taken their place? Instead of markets, you have digital platforms, like Amazon.com, like Uber, which are not markets. The moment you enter Amazon.com, you've exited the market. You are there, you and the algorithm. The algorithm determines what you believe, what you think, what you buy, and it sells it to you directly, bypassing markets. And profits are no longer the wealth accumulating force, because that now has become cloud rent. And if I'm right, that explains a number of things, like, for instance, why are the crises that we live in getting deeper? Because a lot of this value that is produced by proletarians, by wage labor, is now creamed off and siphoned off by the cloud capital owners, the cloudalists, and that creates greater crisis of low aggregate demand. That's the Keynesian story. And at the same time, it explains why we are being quick-marched into a new Cold War, maybe a new hot war between the United States and China, because the United States and China own all the cloud capital in the world, and there's a clash between the cloud capital of the United States and the cloud capital of China. So anyway, there are many different, if I'm right, no guarantee that I'm right, if I'm right, there are many repercussions of my techno-feudal hypothesis.
So when I was reading this book, it reminded me a lot of the work of Jodie Dean, who similarly has been writing about the idea that we're entering an age of neo-feudalism. So similarly, looking at these tech giants, Samsung, Meta, Google, and saying, well, these sort of operate like kings. They operate like kings. They control sovereignty the way that kings would have. But unlike you, she says that this is a phase of capitalism. This is not something which is distinct and new from capitalism. If I've got you right, are you saying that it's the very immateriality of these digital platforms that's the new technological advance which makes it something new? Or is it something else?
No, I don't think it's the immateriality, because, by the way, I think it's really material stuff. You know, cloud capital is really material. We think that it's ethereal, immaterial. Rubbish. If you've ever tried, or don't try it, go into any server farm. You enter a server farm by Microsoft or AWS, the Amazon people, right? And it is a huge factory. You know, it's hole after hole after hole of machinery buzzing, you know, gobbling up huge quantities of electricity. It's like a factory. There's nothing immaterial about it. The optic fiber cables, the cell phone tower, this is all material stuff. Look, hers is a good book, but she's not a Marxist.
Ooh,
so, well, no, I
child.
mean, you know, it helps to be a Marxist. It helps understand.
I think Jodie Dean would
capital.
very much say she's a Marxist.
Well, she's not. Is she? Does she claim to be one?
Yeah, she claims to be a communist.
Yeah, well, but the analysis is not based on the idea of capital. You see, the point I'm making is that if this is the linchpin, this is what my book relies on, the idea that this is a new form of capital. So it's not that it is less material. If I'm right that this is a new form of capital which aims at modifying your behavior, not producing things, and if I'm right also that power is bestowed upon those who own this behavioral modification technology, which is very material, and that shifts wealth and power from the owners of produced means of production to the owners of behavior modifying capital, then this is not capitalism anymore.
I want to push at this door a little bit more.
Okay.
Because going back to, I mean, you can blame Jodie Dean for not a Marxist, so let's go back to Marx and Engels. When they talk about commodification, it's like it's this engine that won't stop moving, and it always has to find new things to commodify.
That's right.
So our very cognitive processes have become commodities. Our attention has become a commodity. Behavior has become a commodity. That's a feature of capitalism, according to them. That's not necessarily
I don't buy that.
the thing after.
You see, I don't think that when you go into the Google search engine, that you're getting a commodity.
No, but you are the commodity.
You're not the commodity either. You know, it's a nice rhetorical flourish. You know, if you get a free service, you are the commodity. No, you're not the commodity. You are part of the commodification process. But you know, what does Alexa do? You know, Amazon's Alexa or Apple's Siri. When you ask for, you know, switch off the lights or recommend a book for me to read, or Spotify giving you advice on what music to listen to, is this service that you're getting a commodity? No, it isn't. Because you're not paying for it. And are you a commodity? No, I think this is the wrong way of seeing it. What happens is that through this dialectical process, going to Marx's dialectics and Engels' dialectics, there is a dialectical process by which you train the machine, Alexa. Alexa is not a machine. Alexa is the anthropomorphized interface of cloud capital, which is all over that network of machinery. What happens is you train that networked machine to train you, to train it, to train you, to train it to know you better. So it gives you good advice. So, and I don't know about you, but when Spotify advises me on what music to listen to, I always like it. Because it knows me. It knows what I like and better than I do. Okay? And when Amazon recommends books, I am always interested in them. And I have never, ever bought an Amazon book, and I have bought some of the books that Amazon recommends, which I regretted. So it knows me, and it knows you. Because you train it to train you, to train it, to train you, to train it to know you. And then the advice is a good advice. And that means that the market is dead. It is completely dead, it's kaput, it's finished. Because when the machine that is owned by Bezos can tell me what I should buy, and then I buy it and then I'm happy with it, and then when I decide to click on purchase, then the same algorithm that has convinced me that I want to buy that correctly sells it to me by bypassing every market, and the same algorithm drives the proletarian labor in the warehouse of Amazon that packs the book or the electric bicycle or anything and sends it to me, and the same algorithm detects the probability that that worker is going to be unionized, and if it finds that it's more than 1.3%, fires him or her, or shuts down that warehouse and opens another warehouse to minimize the chance of union. And this is done by the same piece of capital, which I then replenish by posting a review on the book or the electric bicycle that I purchased, and that adds to the accumulation of that cloud capital. Sorry, folks, but this is not capitalism anymore. This is another system. And I don't call it neo-feudalism, I call it technofeudalism, because, and maybe it's not a good term, maybe I should find another term. But the point is that we haven't gone back to feudalism. This is a step beyond. This is based on capital. It's not based on land. These are capitalists, the Bezoses of the world. So, this is the sensation I get, that on the basis of a mutation of capital, we have, you could call it hyper-capitalism if you wanted, right? But then you wouldn't capture the transformational moment that we find ourselves in. So you read the book, thank you for that. You've seen the argument that I have. Suppose this was 1800, and we're here in London, discussing the state of the world. A great transformation was taking place. Wherever you looked in 1800, you saw feudalism. The House of Lords, the House of Commons, the estates, the way that power was structured in Britain, across the pond, in Europe. We could have said back then, in 1800, that we are now moving from feudalism to a new phase of feudalism called industrial or market feudalism. We could have said that, it wouldn't be wrong. But by saying that this is no longer feudalism, this is capitalism, we alerted people to the enormity of the transformation. This is what I'm trying to do by saying, guys, this is not capitalism anymore. At least it's not capitalism the way we understand it. It doesn't have the dynamics. It's not based on the same social relations of production. It is parasitic on capitalism. Capitalism is essential in the same way that the feudal rural sector was essential to capitalism. They needed food. And that was produced under agricultural production methods that were very feudal. They still are. If you go to Brazil, if you go to wherever large-scale agriculture takes place, it's still feudal. But it helps to make the mental leap that this is a new system. There is continuity, but at the same time, there is a radical transformation.
I want to come back to talk about the technology itself in a second, but thinking about how techno-feudalism emerges, you sort of pinpoint the enabling conditions as being the government's responses to the financial crisis of 2008. So the privatization of the internet being one thing, and the era of low interest rates, ultra low interest rates being another. Two questions. One is, how did low interest rates go into creating techno-feudalism? And two, because I love hypotheticals so much, if interest rates had been, say, 5%, how would things have been different?
Okay, so the story I'm telling here, I'll answer your second question first. Suppose there was no 2008, let's do a very anti-historic, anti-dialectical...
I'm not a historian, man, I'm not going to sue you.
No, anti-historic, not in the sense of being historically correct, but, the counterfactual, right? A serious Marxist would say that crisis was essential to capitalism, so it could not have been otherwise. But let's forget that for a moment. Let's say there was no crisis in 2008. And we didn't have quantitative easing, we didn't have the money printing by the money tree being plucked on behalf of financiers after 2008, also called quantitative easing. Would techno-feudalism hit us? Yes, but it would take much longer. So I think that it was inevitable repercussion of the crisis of capitalism. Even if 2008 was averted, we would have had another crisis in 2015. Even if interest rates were much higher and there wasn't that much money printing, it simply maybe would have taken 20 more years to move to techno-feudalism. So that's the second part of your question. But